Dr. Francia. Foreign Quarterly Review No. 62. 1843. Thomas Carlyle. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. The confused South American Revolution, and set of revolutions, like the South American continent itself, is doubtless a great confused phenomenon, worthy of better knowledge than men yet have of it. Several books, of which we here name a few known to us, have been written on the subject, but bad books mostly, and productive of almost no effect. The heroes of South America have not yet succeeded in picturing any image of themselves, much less any true image of themselves, in the cisatlantic mind or memory. Iturbide, the Napoleon of Mexico, a great man in that narrow country, who was he? He made the thrice celebrated Plan of Iguala, a constitution of no continuance. He became Emperor of Mexico. Most Serene Augustine I, was deposed, vanished to Leghorn, to London, decided on returning, landed on the shore at Tampico, and was there met, and shot. This, in a vague sort, is what the world knows of the Napoleon of Mexico, Most Serene Augustine I, most unfortunate Augustine the last. He did himself publish memoirs or memorials, but few can read them. Oblivion, and the deserts of Panama, have swallowed this brave Don Augustine, vate carut sacro. And Bolivar, the Washington of Colombia, Liberator Bolivar, he too is gone without his fame. Melancholy lithographs represent to us a long-faced, square-browed man, of stern, considerate, consciously considerate aspect, mildly aquiline form of nose, with terrible angularity of jaw, and dark deep eyes, somewhat too close together, for which latter circumstance we earnestly hope the lithograph alone is to blame. This is Liberator Bolivar, a man of much hard fighting, hard riding, of manifold achievements, distresses, heroisms and histrionisms in this world, a many-counseled, much-enduring man, now dead and gone, of whom, except that melancholy lithograph, the cultivated European public knows as good as nothing. Yet did he not fly hither and thither, often in the most desperate manner, with wild cavalry clad in blankets, with war of liberation to the death? Clad in blankets, ponchos the South Americans call them, it is a square blanket, with a short slit in the center, which you draw over your head, and so leave hanging. Many a liberative cavalier has ridden, in those hot climates, without further dress at all, and fought handsomely too, wrapping the blanket round his arm, when it came to the charge. With such cavalry, and artillery and infantry to match, Bolivar has ridden, fighting all the way, through torrid deserts, hot mud swamps, through ice chasms beyond the curve of perpetual frost, more miles than Ulysses ever sailed, let the coming homers take note of it. He has marched over the Andes more than once, a feat analogous to Hannibal's, and seemed to think little of it. Often beaten, banished from the firm land, he always returned again, truculently fought again. He gained in the Cumana regions the immortal victory of Carabobo and several others. Under him was gained the finishing immortal victory of Ayacucho in Peru, where Old Spain, for the last time, burnt powder in those latitudes, and then fled without return. He was dictator, liberator, almost emperor, if he had lived. Some 3 times over did he, in solemn Colombian parliament, lay down his dictatorship with wasanagean eloquence, and as often, on pressing request, take it up again, being a man indispensable. Thrice, or at least twice, did he, in different places, painfully construct a free constitution, consisting of 2 chambers, and a supreme governor for life with liberty to name his successor, the reasonablest democratic constitution you could well construct, and twice, or at least once, did the people, on trial, declare it disagreeable. He was of old, well known in Paris, in the dissolute, the philosophico-political and other circles there. He has shown in many a gay Parisian soirée, this Simon Bolivar, and he, in his later years, in autumn, 1825, rode triumphant into Potosi and the fabulous Inca cities, with clouds of feathered Indians summer setting and war-whopping round him, and as the famed Cerro, metalliferous mountain, came in sight, the bells all pealed out, and there was a thunder of artillery, says General Miller. If this is not a Ulysses, Polytlus, and Palamedes, a much-enduring and many-counseled man, where was there one? Truly a Ulysses whose history were worth its ink, had the Homer that could do it, made his appearance. Of General San Martin, too, there will be something to be said. General San Martin, when we last saw him, 20 years ago or more, through the organs of the authentic steadfast Mr. Myers, had a handsome house in Mendoza, and his own portrait, as I remarked, hung up between those of Napoleon and the Duke of Wellington. In Mendoza, cheerful, mud-built, whitewashed town, seated at the eastern base of the Andes, with its shady public walk well paved and swept, looking out pleasantly, on this hand, over wide horizons of pampa wilderness, pleasantly on that, to the rocky chain, Cordillera they call it, of the sky-piercing mountains, capped in snow, or with volcanic fumes issuing from them, there dwelt General ex Generalissimo San Martin, ruminating past adventures over half the world, and had his portrait hung up between Napoleon's and the Duke of Wellington's. Did the reader ever hear of San Martin's march over the Andes in Chile? It is a feat worth looking at, comparable, most likely, to Hannibal's march over the Alps, while there was yet no Simplon or Mont Cenis highway, and it transacted itself IP the year 1817. South American armies think little of picking their way through the gullies of the Andes, so the Buenos Aires people, having driven out their own Spaniards, and established the reign of freedom, though in a precarious manner, thought it were now good to drive the Spaniards out of Chile, and establish the reign of freedom there also instead, whereupon San Martin, commander at Mendoza, was appointed to do it. By way of preparation, for he began from afar, San Martin, while an army is getting ready at Mendoza, assembles at the fort of San Carlos by the Iguanda River, some days' journey to the south, all attainable tribes of the Pehuenche Indians, to a solemn palaver, so they name it, and civic entertainment, on the esplanade there. The ceremonies and deliberations, as described by General Miller, are somewhat surprising, still more the concluding civic feast, which lasts for 3 days, which consists of horse's flesh for the solid part, and horse's blood with ardent spirits ad libitum for the liquid, consumed with such alacrity, with such results as one may fancy. However, the women had prudently removed all the arms beforehand, nay, 5 or 6 of these poor women, taking it by turns, were always found in a sober state, watching over the rest, so that comparatively little mischief was done, and only 1 or 2 deaths by quarrel took place. The Pehuenches, having drunk their ardent water and horse's blood in this manner, and sworn eternal friendship to San Martin, went home, and communicated to his enemies, across the Andes, the road he meant to take. This was what San Martin had foreseen and meant, the knowing man. He hastened his preparations, got his artillery slung on poles, his men equipped with knapsacks and haversacks, his mules in readiness, and, in all stillness, set forth from Mendoza by another road. Few things in late war, according to General Miller, have been more noteworthy than this march. The long straggling line of soldiers, 6,000 and odd, with their quadrupeds and baggage, winding through the heart of the Andes, breaking for a brief moment the old abysmal solitudes, for you far along, on some narrow roadway, through stony labyrinths, huge rock mountains hanging over your head, on this hand, and under your feet, on that, the roar of mountain cataracts, horror of bottomless chasms, the very winds and echoes howling on you in an almost preternatural manner. Towering rock barriers rise sky-high before you, and behind you, and around you, intricate the outgate. The roadway is narrow, footing none of the best. Sharp turns there are, where it will behove you to mind your paces, 1 false step, and you will need no second. In the gloomy jaws of the abyss yon vanish, and the spectral winds howl requiem. Somewhat better are the suspension bridges, made of bamboo and leather, though they swing like seesaws. Men are stationed with lassos, to gin you dexterously, and fish you up from the torrent, if you trip there. Through this kind of country did San Martin march, straight towards Santiago, to fight the Spaniards and deliver Chile. For ammunition wagons he had sorus, sledges, canoe-shaped boxes, made of dried bull's hide. His cannons were carried on the back of mules, each cannon on 2 mules judiciously harnessed. On the pack saddle of your foremost mule, there rested with firm girths a long strong pole, the other end of which, forked end, we suppose, rested, with like girths, on the pack saddle of the hindmost mule. Your cannon was slung with leathern straps on this pole, and so traveled, swaying and dangling, yet moderately secure. In the knapsack of each soldier was 8 days' provender, dried beef ground into snuff powder, with a modicum of pepper, and a slight seasoning of biscuit or maize meal. Store of onions, of garlic, was not wanting. Paraguay tea could be boiled at eventide, by fire of scrub bushes, or almost of rock lichens or dried mule dung. No further baggage was permitted. Each soldier lay, at night, wrapped in his poncho, with his knapsack for pillow, under the canopy of heaven, lullabied by hard travail, and sank soon enough into steady nose melody, into the foolishest rough colt dance of unimaginable dreams. Had he not left much behind him in the pampas, mother, mistress, what not, and was like to find somewhat, if he ever got across to Chile living? What an entity, one of those night leaguers of San Martin, all steadily snoring there, in the heart of the Andes, under the eternal stars. Wayworn sentries with difficulty keep themselves awake, tired mules chew barley rations, or doze on 3 legs, the feeble watchfire will hardly kindle a cigar, Canopus and the Southern Cross glitter down, and all snore steadily, begirt by granite deserts, looked on by the constellations in that manner. San Martin's improvident soldiers ate out their week's rations almost in half the time, and for the last 3 days, had to rush on, spurred by hunger. This also the knowing San Martin had foreseen, and knew that they could bear it. These rugged guachos of his, nay, that they would march all the faster for it. On the 8th day, hungry as wolves, swift and sudden as a torrent from the mountains, they disembogued, straight towards Santiago, to the astonishment of men, struck the doubly astonished Spaniards into dire misgivings, and then, in pitched fight, after due maneuvers, into total defeat on the plains of Mapo, and again, positively for the last time, on the plains or heights of Chacabco, and completed the deliverance of Chile, as was thought, forever in a day. Alas, the deliverance of Chile was but commenced, very far from completed. Chile, after many more deliverances, up to this hour, is always but delivered, from one set of evildoers to another set. San Martin's maneuvers to liberate Peru, to unite Peru and Chile, and become some Washington Napoleon of the same, did not prosper so well. The suspicion of mankind had to rouse itself, Liberator Bolivar had to be called in, and some revolution or two to take place in the interim. San Martin sees himself peremptorily, though with courtesy, complimented over the Andes again, and in due leisure, at Mendoza, hangs his portrait between Napoleon's and Wellington's. Mr. Myers considered him a fair-spoken, obliging, if somewhat artful man. Might not the Chilenos as well have taken him for their Napoleon? They have gone farther, and, as yet, fared little better. The world-famous General O'Higgins, for example, he, after some revolution or two, became director of Chile, but so terribly hampered by class legislation and the like, what could he make of it? Almost nothing. O'Higgins is clearly of Irish breed, and, though a Chileno-born and natural son of Don Ambrosio O'Higgins, formerly the Spanish Viceroy of Chile, carries his Hibernianism in his very face. A most cheery, jovial, buxom countenance, radiant with pepticity, good humor, and manifold effectuality in peace and war. Of his battles and adventures let some luckier epic writer sing or speak. One thing we foreign reviewers will always remember, his father's immense merits towards Chile in the matter of highways. Till Don Ambrosio arrived to govern Chile, some half-century ago, there probably was not a made road of 10 miles long from Panama to Cape Horn. Indeed, except his roads, we fear there is hardly any yet. One omits the old Inca causeways, as too narrow, being only 3 feet broad, and altogether unfrequented in the actual ages. Don Ambrosio made, with incredible industry and perseverance and skill, in every direction, roads. From Santiago to Valparaiso, where only sure-footed mules with their pack saddles carried goods, there can now wooden-axled cars, loud-sounding, or any kind of vehicle, commodiously roll. It was he that shaped these passes, through the Andes, for most part, hewed them out from mule tracks into roads, certain of them. And think of his casuches. Always on the higher inhospitable solitudes, at every few miles' distance, stands a trim brick cottage, or cachucha, into which the forlorn traveler, introducing himself, finds covert and grateful safety, nay food and refection, for there are iron boxes of pounded beef or other provender, iron boxes of charcoal, to all which the traveler, having bargained with the post office authorities, carries a key. Steel and tinder are not wanting to him, nor do iron skillet, with water from the stream, there he, striking a light, cooks hoarded victuals at eventide, amid the lonely pinnacles of the world, and blesses Governor O'Higgins. With both hands, it may be hoped, if there is vivacity of mind in him. Had you seen this road before it was made? You would lift both your hands and bless General Wade. It affects one with real pain to hear from Mr. Myers, that the War of Liberty has half ruined these O'Higgins casuches. Patriot soldiers, in want of more warmth than the charcoal box could yield, have not scrupled to tear down the door, Dorcas, or whatever wooden thing could be come at, and burn it, on the spur of the moment. The storm-stayed traveler, who sometimes, in threatening weather, has to linger here for days, for 15 days together, does not lift both his hands and bless the patriot soldier. Nay, it appears, the O'Higgins roads, even in the plain country, have not, of late years, been repaired, or in the least attended to, so distressed was the finance department, and are now fast verging towards impassability and the condition of mule tracks again. What a set of animals are men and Chilenos! If an O'Higgins did not now and then appear among them, what would become of the unfortunates? Can you wonder that an O'Higgins sometimes loses temper with them, snuts the persuasive outspread hand, clutching some sharpest hide whip, some terrible sort of justice or gallows lasso therewith, instead, and becomes a Dr. Francia now and then? Both the O'Higgins and Francia, it seems probable, are phases of the same character. Both, one begins to fear, are indispensable from time to time, in a world inhabited by men and Chilenos. As to O'Higgins II, patriot, natural son O'Higgins, he, as we said, had almost no success whatever as a governor, being hampered by class legislation. Alas, a governor in Chile cannot succeed. A governor there has to resign himself to the one of success, and should say in cheerful interrogative tone, like that Pope-elect, who, showing himself on the balcony, was greeted with mere howls. Non piacemo al popolo? And thereupon proceed cheerfully to the next fact. Governing is a rude business everywhere, but in South America it is of quite primitive rudeness. They have no parliamentary way of changing ministries as yet, nothing but the rude primitive way of hanging the old ministry on gibbets, that the new may be installed. Their government has altered its name, says the sturdy Mr. Myers, rendered sulky by what he saw there, altered its name, but its nature continues as before. Shameless peculation, malversation, that is their government, oppression formerly by Spanish officials, now by native haciendados, land proprietors, the thing called justice still at a great distance from them, says the sulky Mr. Myers, yes, but coming always, answer we, every new gibbeting of an old ineffectual ministry bringing justice somewhat nearer. Nay, as Myers himself has to admit, certain improvements are already indisputable. Trade everywhere, in spite of multiplex confusions, has increased, is increasing, the days of somnolent monopoly and the old Acapulco ship are gone, quite over the horizon. Too good, or partially good measures, the very necessity of things has everywhere brought about in those poor countries, clipping of the enormous bat wings of the clergy, and emancipating of the slaves. Bat wings, we say, for truly the South American clergy had grown to be as a kind of bat vampires. Readers have heard of that huge South American bloodsucker, which fixes its bill in your circulating vital fluid as you lie asleep, and there sucks, waving you with the motion of its detestable leather wings into ever deeper sleep, and so drinking till it is satisfied, and you do not awaken any more. The South American governments, all in natural feud with the old church dignitaries, and likewise all in great straits for cash, have everywhere confiscated the monasteries, cashiered the disobedient dignitaries, melted the superfluous church plate into piastres, and, on the whole, shorn the wings of their vampire, so that if it still suck, you will at least have a chance of awakening before death. Then again, the very one of soldiers of liberty led to the emancipating of blacks, yellows, and other colored persons. Your mulatto, nay your Negro, if well drilled, will stand fire as well as another. Poor South American emancipators, they began with Yoni, Reynal, and company, at what gospel of social contract and the rights of man, under the most unpropitious circumstances, and have hitherto got only to the length we see. Nay now, it seems, they do possess universities, which are at least schools with other than monk teachers, they have got libraries, though as yet almost nobody reads them, and our friend Myers, repeatedly knocking at all doors of the Grand Chile National Library, could never to this hour discover where the key lay, and had to content himself with looking in through the windows. Myers, as already hinted, desiderates unspeakable improvements in Chile, desiderates, indeed, as the basis of all, an immense increase of soap and water. Yes, thou sturdy Myers, dirt is decidedly to be removed, whatever improvements, temporal or spiritual, may be intended next. According to Myers, the open, still more the secret personal nastiness of those remote populations, rises almost towards the sublime. Finest silks, gold brocades, pearl necklaces, and diamond eardrops, are no security against it. Alas, all is not gold that glitters, somewhat that glitters is mere putrid fishskin. Decided, enormously increased appliance of soap and water, in all its branches, with all its adjuncts, this, according to Myers, would be an improvement. He says also, in his haste, as is probable, like the Hebrew psalmist, that all Chileno men are liars, all, or in appearance, all. A people that uses almost no soap, and speaks almost no truth, but goes about in that fashion, in a state of personal nastiness, and also of spiritual nastiness, approaching the sublime, such people is not easy to govern well. But undoubtedly by far the notablest of all these South American phenomena is Dr. Francia and his dictatorship in Paraguay, concerning whom and which we have now more particularly to speak. Francia and his reign of terror have excited some interest, much vague wonder in this country, and especially given a great shock to constitutional feeling. One would rather wish to know Dr. Francia, but unhappily one cannot. Out of such a murk of distracted shadows and rumors, in the other hemisphere of the world, who would pretend at present to decipher the real portraiture of Dr. Francia and his life? None of us can. A few credible features, wonderful enough, original enough in our constitutional time, will perhaps to the impartial eye disclose themselves. These, with some endeavor to interpret these, may lead certain readers into various reflections, constitutional and other, not entirely without benefit. Certainly, as we say, nothing could well shock the constitutional feeling of mankind, as Dr. Francia has done. Dionysius the tyrant of Syracuse, and indeed the whole breed of tyrants, one hoped, had gone many hundred years ago, with their reward, and here, under our very nose, rises a new tyrant, claiming also his reward from us. Precisely when constitutional liberty was beginning to be understood a little, and we flattered ourselves that by due ballot boxes, by due registration courts, and bursts of parliamentary eloquence, something like a real national palaver would be got up in those countries, arises this tawny-visaged, lean, inexorable Dr. Francia, claps you an embargo on all that, says to constitutional liberty, in the most tyrannous manner, hitherto, and no farther. It is an undeniable, though an almost incredible fact, that Francia, a lean private individual, practitioner of law, and doctor of divinity, did, for 20 or near 30 years, stretch out his rod over the foreign commerce of Paraguay, saying to it, cease. The ships lay high and dry, their pitchless seams all yawning on the clay banks of the Paraná, and no man could trade but by Francia's license. If any person entered Paraguay, and the doctor did not like his papers, his talk, conduct, or even the cut of his face, it might be the worse for such person. Nobody could leave Paraguay on any pretext whatever. It mattered not that you were man of science, astronomer, geologer, astrologer, wizard of the north, Francia heeded none of these things. The whole world knows of M. Aimé Bonpland, how Francia seized him, descending on his tea establishment in Entre Rios, like an obscene vulture, and carried him into the interior, contrary even to the law of nations, how the great Humboldt and other high persons expressly applied to Dr. Francia, calling on him, in the name of human science, and as it were under penalty of reprobation, to liberate M. Bonpland, and how Dr. Francia made no answer and M. Bonpland did not return to Europe, and indeed has never yet returned. It is also admitted that Dr. Francia had a gallows, had jailers, law fiscals, officials, and executed, in his time, upwards of 40 persons, some of them in a very summary manner. Liberty of private judgment, unless it kept its mouth shut, was at an end in Paraguay. Paraguay lay under interdict, cut off for above 20 years from the rest of the world, by a new Dionysius of Paraguay. All foreign commerce had ceased, how much more all domestic constitution building. These are strange facts. Dr. Francia, we may conclude at least, was not a common man but an uncommon. How unfortunate that there is almost no knowledge of him procurable at present. Next to none. The Paraguanos can in many cases spell and read, but they are not a literary people, and, indeed, this doctor was, perhaps, too awful a practical phenomenon to be calmly treated of in the literary way. Your Bruegel paints his sea storm, not while the ship is laboring and cracking, but after he has got to shore, and is safe under cover. Our Buenos Aires friends, again, who are not without habits of printing, lay at a great distance from Francia, under great obscurations of quarrel and controversy with him, their constitutional feelings shocked to an extreme degree by the things he did. To them, there could little intelligence float down, on those long muddy waters, through those vast distracted countries, that was not more or less of a distracted nature, and then from Buenos Aires over into Europe, there is another long tract of distance, liable to new distractions. Francia, dictator of Paraguay, is, at present, to the European mind, little other than a chimera, at best, the statement of a puzzle, to which the solution is still to seek. As the Paraguanos, though not a literary people, can many of them spell and write, and are not without a discriminating sense of true and untrue, why should not some real life of Francia, from those parts, be still possible? If a writer of genius arise there, he is hereby invited to the enterprise. Surely in all places your writing genius ought to rejoice over an acting genius, when he falls in with such, and say to himself, here or nowhere is the thing for me to write of. Why do I keep pen and ink at all, if not to apprise men of this singular acting genius and the like of him? My fine arts and aesthetics, my epics, literatures, poetics, if I will think of it, do all at bottom mean either that or else nothing whatever. Hitherto our chief source of information as to Francia is a little book, the second on our list, set forth in French some 16 years ago, by the Messrs. Renger and Longchamp. Translations into various languages were executed, of that into English it is our painful duty to say that no man, except in the case of extreme necessity, shall use it as reading. The translator, having little fear of human detection, and seemingly none at all of divine or diabolic, has done his work even unusually ill, with ignorance, with carelessness, with dishonesty prepense, coolly admitting whatsoever he saw that he did not understand. Poor man, if he yet survive, let him reform in time. He has made a French book, which was itself but lean and dry, into the most wooden of English false books, doing evil as he could in that matter, and claimed wages for it, as if the feat deserved wages first of all. Reformation, even on the small scale, is highly necessary. The Messrs. Renger and Longchamp were, and we hope still are, two Swiss surgeons, who in the year 1819 resolved on carrying their talents into South America, into Paraguay, with views towards natural history, among other things. After long towing and struggling in those Paraná floods, and distracted provinces, after much detention by stress of weather and of war, they arrived accordingly in Francia's country, but found that without Francia's leave they could not quit it again. Francia was now a Dionysius of Paraguay. Paraguay had grown to be, like some mousetraps and other contrivances of art and nature, easy to enter, and possible to get out of. Our brave surgeons, our brave Renger, for it is he alone of the two that speaks and writes, reconciled themselves, were set to doctoring of Francia's soldiery, of Francia's self, collected plants and beetles, and, for 6 years, endured their lot rather handsomely. At length, in 1825, the embargo was for a time lifted, and they got home. This book was the consequence. It is not a good book, but at that date there was, on the subject, no other book at all, nor is there yet any other better, or as good. We consider it to be authentic, veracious, moderately accurate, though lean and dry, it is intelligible, rational, in the French original, not unreadable. We may say it embraces up to this date, the present date, all of importance that is yet known in Europe about the Dr. Despot. Add to this its indisputable brevity, the fact that it can be read sooner by several hours than any other Dr. Francia. These are its excellences, considerable, though wholly of a comparative sort. After all, brevity is the soul of wit. There is an endless merit in a man's knowing when to have done. The stupidest man, if he will be brief in proportion, may fairly claim some hearing from us. He too, the stupidest man, has seen something, heard something, which is his own, distinctly peculiar, never seen or heard by any man in this world before. Let him tell us that, he, brief in proportion, shall be welcome. The Messrs. Robertson, with their Francia's Reign of Terror, and other books on South America, have been much before the world of late, and failed not of a perusal from this reviewer, whose next sad duty it now is to say a word about them. The Messrs. Robertson, some 35 years ago, were two young Scotchmen, from the neighborhood of Edinburgh, as would seem, who, under fair auspices, set out for Buenos Aires, thence for Paraguay, and other quarters of that remote continent, in the way of commercial adventure. Being young men of vivacity and open eyesight, they surveyed with attentive view those convulsed regions of the world, wherein it was evident that revolution raged not a little, but also that precious metals, cowhides, Jesuits' bark, and multiplex commodities, were nevertheless extant, and iron or brazen implements, ornaments, cotton and woolen clothing, and British manufactures not a few, were objects of desire to mankind. The brothers Robertson, acting on these facts, appear to have prospered, to have extensively flourished in their commerce, which they gradually extended up the River Plate, to the city of the seven streams or currents, Corrientes so called, and higher even to Asunción, metropolis of Paraguay, in which latter place, so extensive did the commercial interests grow, it seemed at last expedient that one or both of the prosperous brothers should take up his personal residence. Personal residence accordingly they did take up, one or both of them, and maintain, in a fluctuating way, now in this city, now in that, of the de la Plata, Paraná or Paraguay country, for a considerable space of years. How many years, in precise arithmetic, it is impossible, from these inextricably complicated documents now before us, to ascertain. In Paraguay itself, in Asunción city itself, it is very clear, the brothers Robertson did, successively or simultaneously, in a fluctuating inextricable manner, live for certain years, and occasionally saw Dr. Francia with their own eyes, though to them or others, he had not yet become notable. Mountains of cow and other hides, it would appear quitted those countries by movement of the brothers Robertson, to be worn out in Europe as tan boots and horse harness, with more or less satisfaction, not without due profit to the merchants, we shall hope. About the time of Dr. Francia's beginning his reign of terror, or earlier it may be, for there are no dates in these inextricable documents, the Messrs. Robertson were lucky enough to take final farewell of Paraguay, and carry their commercial enterprises into other quarters of that vast continent, where the reign was not of terror. Their voyagings, counter-voyagings, comings and goings, seem to have been extensive, frequent, inextricably complex, to Europe, to Tucumán, to Glasgow, to Chile, to Lasswade and elsewhither, too complex for a succinct intelligence, as that of our readers has to be at present. Sufficient for us to know, that the Messrs. Robertson did bodily, and for good, return to their own country some few years since, with what net result of caches but dimly adumbrated in these documents, certainly with some increase of knowledge, had the unfolding of it but been brief in proportion. Indisputably the Messrs. Robertson had somewhat to tell, their eyes had seen some new things, of which their hearts and understandings had taken hold more or less. In which circumstances the Messrs. Robertson decided on publishing a book. Arrangements being made, 2 volumes of Letters on Paraguay came out, with Due Welcome from the World, in 1839. We have read these letters for the first time lately, a book of somewhat aqueous structure, immeasurably thinner than one could have wished, otherwise not without merit. It is written in an offhand, free-glowing, very artless, very incorrect style of language, of thought, and of conception, breathes a cheerful, eupeptic, social spirit, as of adventurous South American Britons, worthy to succeed in business, gives one, here and there, some visible concrete feature, some lively glimpse of those remote sunburnt countries, and has throughout a kind of bantering humor or quasi-humor, a joviality and healthiness of heart, which is comfortable to the reader, in some measure. A book not to be despised in these dull times, one of that extensive class of books which a reader can peruse, so to speak, with one eye shut and the other not open, a considerable luxury for some readers. These Letters on Paraguay meeting, as would seem, a unanimous approval, it was now determined by the Messrs. Robertson that they would add a 3rd volume, and entitle it Dr. Francia's Reign of Terror. They did so, and this likewise the present reviewer has read. Unluckily the authors had, as it were, nothing more whatever to say about Dr. Francia, or next to nothing, and under this condition, it must be owned they have done their book with what success was well possible. Given a inch 3 of respectable Castile soap, to lather it up in water so as to fill 1 punch and wine measure, this is the problem, let a man have credit, of its kind, for doing his problem. The Messrs. Robertson have picked almost every fact of significance from Renger and Longchamp, adding some not very significant reminiscences of their own. This is the inch 2 of soap. You lather it up in Robertsonian loquacity, joviality, commercial in banter, leading article philosophy, or other aqueous vehicles, till it fills the punchin, the volume of 400 pages, and say there. The public, it would seem, did not fling even this in the face of the vendors, but bought it as a punchin filled, and the consequences are already here, 3 volumes more on South America, from the same assiduous Messrs. Robertson. These also, in his eagerness, this present reviewer has read, and has, alas, to say that they are simply the old volumes in new vocables, under a new figure. Intrinsically all that we did not already know of these 3 volumes, there are craftsmen of no great eminence who will undertake to write it in 1 sheet. Yet there they stand, 3 solid-looking volumes, 1,000 printed pages and upwards, 3 puncheons more lathered out of the old inch 2 of Castile soap. It is too bad. A necessitous ready-witted Irishman sells you an indifferent grey horse, steals it overnight, paints it black, and sells it to you again on the morrow. He is haled before judges, sharply cross-questioned, tried and almost executed, for such adroitness in horseflesh, but there is no law yet as to books. The La Condamine, about a century ago, was one of a world-famous company that went into those equinoctial countries, and for the space of 9 or 10 years did exploits there. From Quito to Cuenca he measured degrees of the meridian, climbed mountains, took observations, had adventures, wild Creoles opposing Spanish nescience to human science, wild Indians throwing down your whole cargo of instruments occasionally in the heart of remote deserts, and striking work there. The La Condamine saw bullfights at Cuenca, 5 days running, and, on the 5th day, saw his unfortunate 2 audacious surgeon massacred by popular tumult there. He sailed the entire length of the Amazon's river, in Indian canoes, over narrow Pongo rapids, over infinite mudwaters, the infinite tangled wilderness with its reeking desolation on the right hand of him and on the left, and had mischances, adventures, and took celestial observations all the way, and made remarks. Apart altogether from his meridian degrees, which belong in a very strict sense to world history and the advancement of all Adam's sinful posterity, this man and his party saw and suffered many 100 times as much of mere romance adventure as the Messrs. Robertson did, Madame Godin's passage down the Amazons, and frightful life in death amid the howling forest labyrinths, and wrecks of her dear friends, amounts to more adventure of itself than was ever dreamt of in the Robertsonian world. And of all this de La Condamine gives pertinent, lucid, and conclusively intelligible and credible account in 1 very small 8vo volume, not quite the 8th part of what Messrs. Robertson have already written, in a not pertinent, not lucid, or conclusively intelligible and credible manner. And the Messrs. Robertson talk repeatedly, in their last volumes, of writing still other volumes on Chilp if the public will encourage. The public will be a monstrous fool if it do. The public ought to stipulate first that the real new knowledge forthcoming there about Chile be separated from the knowledge or ignorance already known, that the preliminary question be rigorously put, are several volumes the space to hold it, or a small fraction of 1 volume? On the whole, it is a sin, good reader, though there is no act of Parliament against it, an indubitable malefaction or crime. No mortal has a right to wag his tongue, much less to wag his pen, without saying something, he knows not what mischief he does, past computation, scattering words without meaning, to afflict the whole world yet before they cease. For thistledown flies abroad on all winds and airs of wind, idle thistles, idle dandelions, and other idle products of nature or the human mind, propagate themselves in that way, like to cover the face of the earth, did not man's indignant providence with reap hook, with rake, with autumnal steel and tinder, intervene. It is frightful to think how every idle volume flies abroad like an idle globular downbeard, embryo of new millions, every word of it a potential seed of infinite new downbeards and volumes, for the mind of man is voracious, germinative, above all things, of the downbeard species. Why, the author corps in Great Britain, every soul of them inclined to grow mere dandelions if permitted, is now supposed to be about 10,000 strong, and the reading corps, who read merely to escape from themselves, with one eye shut and the other not open, and will put up with almost any dandelion or thing which they can read without opening both their eyes, amounts to 27 millions all but a few. Oh, could the Messrs. Robertson, spirited, articulate speaking men, once know well in what a comparatively blessed mood you close your brief, intelligent, conclusive de la Condamine, and feel that you have passed your evening well and nobly, as in a temple of wisdom, not ill and disgracefully, as in brawling tavern supper rooms, with fools and noisy persons. In that case, perhaps the Messrs. Robertson would write their new work on Chile in part of a volume. But enough of this Robertsonian department, which we must leave to the fates and supreme providences. These spirited, articulate-speaking Robertsons are far from the worst of their kind, nay, among the best, if you will, only unlucky in this case, in coming across the autumnal steel and tinder. Let it cease to rain angry sparks on them, enough now, and more than enough. To cure that unfortunate department by philosophical criticism, the attempt is most vain. Who will dismount on a hasty journey, with the day declining, to attack mosquito swarms with a horsewhip? Spur swiftly through them, breathing perhaps some pious prayer to heaven. By the horsewhip they cannot be killed. Drain out the swamps where they are bred. Couldst thou do something towards that? And in the meanwhile, how to get on with this of Dr. Francia? The materials, as our reader sees, are of the miserablest, mere intricate inanity, if we accept poor Woodenranger, and little more, not facts, but broken shadows of facts, clouds of confused bluster and jargon, the whole still more bewildered in the Robertsons, by what we may call a running shriek of constitutional denunciation, sanguinary tyrant, and so forth. How is any picture of Francia to be fabricated out of that? Certainly, first of all, by omission of the running shriek. This latter we shall totally omit. Francia, the sanguinary tyrant, was not bound to look at the world through Renger's eaves, through Parish Robertson's eyes, but faithfully through his own eyes. We are to consider that, in all human likelihood, this Dionysius of Paraguay did mean something, and then ask in quietness, what? The running shriek once hushed, perhaps many things will compose themselves, and straggling fractions of information, almost infinitesimally small, may become unexpectedly luminous. An unscientific cattle breeder and tiller of the earth, in some nameless chacra not far from the city of Asunción, was the father of this remarkable human individual, and seems to have evoked him into being sometime in the year 1757. The man's name is not known to us, his very nation is a point of controversy. Francia himself gave him out for an immigrant, of French extraction. The popular belief was, that he had wandered over from Brazil. Portuguese or French, or both in one, he produced this human individual, and had him christened by the name of José Gaspar Rodriguez Francia, in the year above mentioned. Rodriguez no doubt had a mother too, but her name, also nowhere found mentioned, must be omitted in this delineation. Her name and all her fond maternities, and workings, and sufferings, good brown lady, are sunk in dumb forgetfulness, and buried there along with her, under the 25th parallel of southern latitude, and no British reader is required to interfere with them. José Rodriguez must have been a loose-made tawny creature, much given to taciturn reflection, probably to crying humors, with fits of vehement ill nature. Such a subject, it seemed to the parent Francia, cautiously reflecting on it, would, of all attainable trades, be suitablest for preaching the gospel, and doing the divine offices, in a country like Paraguay. There were other young Francias, at least one sister and one brother in addition, of whom the latter by and by went mad. The Francias, with their adust character, and vehement French-Portuguese blood, had perhaps all a kind of aptitude for madness. The dictator himself was subject to the terriblest fits of hypochondria, as your adust men of genius too frequently are. The lean Rodriguez, we fancy, may have been of a devotional turn withal. Born half a century earlier, he had infallibly been so. Devotional or not, he shall be a priest, and do the divine offices in Paraguay, perhaps in a very unexpected way. Rodriguez, having learned his horn books and elementary branches at Asunción, was accordingly dispatched to the University of Cordova in Tucumán, to pursue his curriculum in that seminary. So far we know, but almost no farther. What kind of curriculum it was, what lessons, spiritual spoon meat, the poor lank sallow boy was crammed with, in Cordova High Seminary, and how he took to it and pined or throve on it, is entirely uncertain. Lank sallow boys in the Tucumán and other high seminaries are often dreadfully ill dealt with, in respect to their spiritual spoon meat, as the times go. Spoon poison you might often call it, rather, as if the object were to make them Mithridates, able to live on poison. Which may be a useful art, too, in its kind. Nay, in fact, if we consider it, these high seminaries and establishments exist there, in Tucumán and elsewhere, not for that lank sallow boy's special purposes, but for their own wise purposes. They were made and put together, a long while since, without taking the smallest counsel of the sallow boy. Frequently they seemed to say to him, all along, this precious thing that lies in thee, O sallow boy, of genius, so called, it may to thee and to eternal nature, be precious, but to us and to temporary Tucumán, it is not precious, but pernicious, deadly. We require thee to quit this, or expect penalties. And yet the poor boy, how can he quit it, eternal nature herself, from the depths of the universe, ordering him to go on with it? From the depths of the universe, and of his own soul, latest revelation of the universe, he is, in a silent, imperceptible, but irrefragable manner, directed to go on with it, and has to go, though under penalties. Penalties of very death, or worse. Alas, the poor boy, so willing to obey temporary tucumans, and yet unable to disobey eternal nature, is truly to be pitied. Thou shalt be Rodriguez Francia, cries nature, and the poor boy to himself. Thou shalt be Ignatius Loyola, Friar Ponderoso, Don Fat Pancho y San Juanito, cries Tucumán. The poor creature's whole boyhood is one long lawsuit, Rodriguez Francia against all persons in general. It is so in Tucumán, so in most places. You cannot advise effectually into what high seminary he had best be sent. The only safe way is to bargain beforehand, that he have force born with him sufficient to make itself good against all persons in general. Be this as it may, the lean Francia prosecutes his studies at Cordova, waxes gradually taller towards new destinies. Rodriguez Francia, in some kind of Jesuit skullcap, and black college serge gown, a lank rawbone creature, stalking with a down look through the irregular public streets of Cordova in those years, with an infinitude of painful unspeakabilities in the interior of him, is an interesting object to the historical mind. So much is unspeakable, O Rodriguez, and it is a most strange universe this we are born into, and the theorem of Ignatius Loyola and Don Fat Pancho y San Juanito seems to me to hobble somewhat. Much is unspeakable, lying within one like a dark lake of doubt, of acheronic dread leading down to chaos itself. Much is unspeakable, answers Francia, but somewhat also is speakable, this for example, that I will not be a priest in Tucumán in these circumstances, that I should like decidedly to be a secular person rather, were it even a lawyer. Francia, arrived at man's years, changes from divinity to law. Some say it was in divinity that he graduated, and got his doctor's hat. Renger says, divinity, the Robertsons, likelier to be incorrect, call him Doctor of Laws. To our present readers it is all one, or nearly so. Rodriguez quitted the Tucumán alma mater, with some beard on his chin, and reappeared in Asunción to look out for practice at the bar. What had Rodriguez contrived to learn, or grow to, under this his alma mater in Cordova, when he quitted her? The answer is a mere guess. His curriculum, we again say, is not yet known. Some faint smattering of arithmetic, or the everlasting laws of numbers, faint smattering of geometry, everlasting laws of shapes, these things we guess, not altogether in the dark, Rodriguez did learn, and found extremely remarkable. Curious enough, that round globe put into that round drum, to touch it at the ends and all round, it is precisely as if you clapped two into the inside of three, not a jot more, not a jot less. Wonder at it, O Francia, for in fact it is a thing to make one pause. Old Greek Archimedes, Pythagoras's, dusky Indians, old nearly as the hills, detected such things, and they have got across into Paraguay, into this brain of thine, thou happy Francia. How is it, too, that the Almighty Maker's planets run in those heavenly spaces, in paths which are conceivable in thy poor human head as sections of a cone? The thing thou conceivest as an ellipse, the Almighty Maker has set his planets to roll in that. Clear proof, which neither Loyola nor you San Juanito can contravene, that thou too art denizen of this universe, that thou too, in some inconceivable manner, wert present at the council of the gods. Faint smatterings of such things Francia did learn in Tucumán. Endless heavy fodderings of Jesuit theology, poured on him and round him by the wagon load, incessantly, and year after year, he did not learn, but left lying there as shot rubbish. On the other hand, some slight inkling of human grammatical vocables, especially of French vocables, seems probable. French vocables, bodily garments of the encyclopedic and gospel according to Yoni, Jean-Jacques and Company, of infinite import to Francia. Nay, is it not in some sort beautiful to see the sacred flame of ingenuous human curiosity, love of knowledge, awakened, amid the damp somnolent vapors, real and metaphorical, the damp tropical poison jungles, and fat Lethean stupefactions and entanglements, even in the heart of a poor Paraguay Creole? Sacred flame, no bigger yet than that of a farthing rushlight, and with nothing but second-hand French class books in science, and in politics and morals nothing but the Reynolds and Rousseaus, to feed it, an ill-fed, lank quavering, most blue-colored, almost ghastly-looking flame, but a needful one, a kind of sacred one even that. Thou shalt love knowledge, search what is the truth of this God's universe, thou art privileged and bound to love it, to search for it, in Jesuit Tucumán, in all places that the sky covers, and shall try even Vonies for help, if there be no other help. This poor blue-colored inextinguishable flame in the soul of Rodriguez Francia, there as it burns better or worse, in many figures, through the whole life of him, is very notable to me. Blue flame though it be, it has to burn up considerable quantities of poisonous lumber from the general face of Paraguay, and singe the profound impenetrable forest jungle, spite of all its brambles and lianas, into a very black condition, intimating that there shall be disease and removal on the part of said forest jungle, peremptory removal, that the blessed sunlight shall again look in upon his cousin earth, tyrannously hidden from him, for so many centuries now. Courage, Rodriguez. Rodriguez, indifferent to such remote considerations, successfully addicts himself to law pleadings, and general private studies, in the city of Asunción. We have always understood he was one of the best advocates, perhaps the very best, and, what is still more, the justest that ever took briefs in that country. This the Robertsonian reign of terror itself is willing to admit, nay repeatedly asserts, and impresses on us. He was so just and true, while a young man, gave such divine prognostics of a life of nobleness, and then, in his riper years, so belied all that. Shameful to think of, he bade fair, at one time, to be a friend of humanity of the first water, and then gradually, hardened by political success, and love of power, he became a mere ravenous ghoul, or solitary thief in the night, stealing the constitutional palladiums from their parliament houses, and executed upward of 40 persons. Sad to consider what men and friends of humanity will come to. For the rest it is not given to this or as yet to any editor, till a biography arrive from Paraguay, to shape out, with the smallest clearness, a representation of Francia's existence as an Asunción advocate. The scene is so distant, the conditions of it so unknown. Asunción city, near 300 years old now, lies in free and easy fashion, on the left bank of the Paraná River, embosomed among fruit forests, rich tropical umbrage, thickwood rounded everywhere, which serves for defense too against the Indians. Approach by which of the various roads you will, it is through miles of solitary shady avenue, shutting out the sun's glare, over canopying, as with grateful green awning, the loose sand highway, where, in the early part of this century, date undiscoverable in those intricate volumes, Mr. Parrish Robertson, advancing on horseback, met one cart driven by a smart brown girl, in red bodice, with long black hair, not unattractive to look upon, and for a space of 12 miles, no other articulate speaking thing whatever. The people of that profuse climate live in a careless abundance, troubling themselves about few things, build what wooden carts, hide beds, mud brick houses, are indispensable, import what of ornamental lies handiest abroad, exchanging it for Paraguay tea and sewed goatskins. Riding through the town of Santa Fe, with Parrish Robertson at 3 in the afternoon, you will find the entire population just risen from its siesta, slipshod, half-buttoned, sitting in its front verandas open to the street, eating pumpkins with voracity, sunk to the ears in pumpkins, imbibing the grateful saccharine juices, in a free and easy way. They look up at the sound of your hoofs, not without good humor. Frondant trees parasol the streets, thanks to nature and the Virgin. You will be welcome at their tertulias, a kind of soiree, as the flunky says, consisting of flirtation and the usual trimmings, soiree on the table about 7 o'clock. Before this, the whole population, it is like, has gone to bathe promiscuously, and cool and purify itself in the Paraná, promiscuously, but you have all got linen bathing garments and e'en swash about with some decency, a great relief to the human tabernacle in those climates. At your tertulia, it is said, the Andalusian eyes, still bright to the 10th or 12th generation, are distrative, seductive enough, and argue a soul that would repay cultivating. The beautiful half-savages, full of wild sheet lightning, which might be made continuously luminous. Tertulia well over, you sleep on hide stretchers, perhaps here and there on a civilized mattress, within doors or on the housetops. In the damp flat country parts, where the mosquitoes abound, you sleep on high stages, mounted on 4 poles, 40 feet above the ground, attained by ladders, so high, blessed be the Virgin, no mosquito e'en follow to sting, it is a blessing of the Virgin or some other. You sleep there, in an indiscriminate arrangement, each in his several poncho or blanket cloak, with some saddle, deal box, wooden log, or the like, under your head. For bed tester is the canopy of everlasting blue, for night lamp burns canopus in his infinite space, mosquitoes cannot reach you, if it please the powers. And rosy-fingered morn, suffusing the east with sudden red and gold, and other flame heraldry of swift advancing day, attenuates all dreams, and the sun's first level light volley shears away sleep from living creatures everywhere, and living men do then awaken on their 4-post stage there, in the pampas, and might begin with prayer if they liked, one foul eyes. There is an altar decked on the horizon's edge yonder, is there not, and a cathedral wide enough, how, overnight, JMU have defended yourselves against vampires, is unknown to this editor. The Guijo population, it must be owned, is not yet fit for constitutional liberty. They are a rude people, lead a drowsy life, of ease and sluttish abundance, one shade, and but one, above a dog's life, which is defined as ease and scarcity. The arts are in their infancy, and not less the virtues. For equipment, clothing, bedding, household furniture, and general outfit of every kind, those simple populations depend much on the skin of the cow, making of it most things wanted, lasso, bolas, ship cordage, rimmings of cart wheels, spattered ashes, beds, and house doors. In country places they sit on the skull of the cow. General Artigas was seen, and spoken with, by one of the Robertsons, sitting among field officers, all on cow skulls, toasting stripes of beef, and dictating to 3 secretaries at once. They sit on the skull of the cow in country places, nay they heat themselves, and even burn lime, by igniting the carcass of the cow. One art they seem to have perfected, and one only, that of riding. Asleys and duros must hide their head, all glories of Newmarket and Epsom dwindle to extinction, in comparison of Guijo horsemanship. Certainly if ever centaurs lived upon the earth, these are of them. They stick on their horses as if both were one flesh, galloping where there seems hardly path for an ibex, leaping like kangaroos, and flourishing their nooses and boluses the while. They e'en whirl themselves round under the belly of the horse, in eases of war stratagem, and stick fast, hanging on by the mere great toe-odd heel. You think it is a drove of wild horses galloping up, on a sudden, with wild scream, it becomes a troop of centaurs with pikes in their hands. Nay, they have the skill, which most of all transcends Newmarket, of riding on horses that are not fed, and can bring fresh speed and alacrity out of a horse which, with you, was on the point of lying down. To ride on 3 horses with duro they would esteem a small feat, to ride on the broken-winded fractional part of 1 horse, that is the feat. Their huts abound in beef, in reek also, and rubbish, excelling in dirt most plays that human nature has anywhere inhabited. Poor guachos. They drink Paraguay tea, sucking it up in succession, through the same tin pipe, from one common skillet. They are hospitable, sooty, leathery, lying, laughing fellows, of excellent talent in their sphere. They have stoicism, though ignorant of Zeno, nay stoicism coupled with real gaiety of heart. Amidst their reek, they laugh loud, in rough jolly banter, they twang, in a plaintive manner, rough love melodies on a kind of guitar, smoke infinite tobacco, and delight in gambling and ardent spirits, ordinary refuge of voracious empty souls. For the same reason, and a better, they delight also in Corpus Christi ceremonies, mass eintings, and devotional performances. These men are fit to be drilled into something. Their lives stand there like empty epes bottles, calling to the heavens on the earth, and all Dr. Francias who may pass that way, is there nothing to put into us, then? Nothing but nomadic idleness, Jesuit superstition, rubbish, reek, and dry stripes of tough beef. Ye unhappy guachos, yes, there is something other, there are several things other, to put into you. But withal, you will observe, the 7 devils have first to be put out of you, idleness, lawless brutalness, darkness, falseness, 7 devils or more. And the way to put something into you is, alas, not so plain at present. Is it? Alas, on the whole, is it not perhaps to lay good horsewhips lustily upon you, and cast out these 7 devils as a preliminary? How Francia passed his days in such a region, where philosophy, as is too clear, was at the lowest ebb? Francia, like Quintus Fixline, had perennial fireproof joys, namely employments. He had much law business, a great and ever-increasing reputation as a man at once skillful and faithful in the management of causes for men. Then, in his leisure hours, he had his Vonies, Reynolds, he had second-hand scientific treatises in French, He loved to interrogate nature, as they say, to possess theodolites, telescopes, star glasses, any kind of glass or book, or gazing implement whatever, through which he might try to catch a glimpse of fact in this strange universe. Poor Francia. Nay, it is said, his hard heart was not without inflammability, was sensible to those Andalusian eyes still bright in the 10th or 12th generation. In such case, too, it may have burnt, one would think, like anthracite, in a somewhat ardent manner. Rumors to this effect are afloat, not at once incredible. Pity there had not been some Andalusian pair of eyes, with speculation, depth and soul enough in the rear of them to fetter Dr. Francia permanently, and make a housefather of him. It had been better, but it befell not. As for that light-headed, smart, brown girl whom, 20 years afterwards, you saw selling flowers on the streets of Asuncion, and leading a light life, is there any certainty that she was Dr. Francia's daughter? Any certainty that, even if so, he could and should have done something considerable for her? Poor Francia, poor light-headed, smart, brown girl, this present reviewer cannot say. Francia is a somewhat lonesome, down-looking man, apt to be solitary even in the press of men, wears a face not unvisited by laughter, yet tending habitually towards the sorrowful, the stern. He passes everywhere for a man of veracity, punctuality, of iron methodic rigor, of iron rectitude, above all. The skillful lawyer, the learned lawyer, these are reputations, but the honest lawyer. This law case was reported by the Robertsons before they thought of writing of Francia's reign of terror, with that running shriek, which so confuses us. We love to believe the anecdote, even in its present loose state, as significant of many things in Francia. It has been already observed that Francia's reputation, as a lawyer, was not only unsullied by venality, but conspicuous for rectitude. He had a friend in Asuncion of the name of Domingo Rodriguez. This man had cast a covetous eye upon a Naboth's vineyard, and this Naboth, of whom Francia was the open enemy, was called Stanislas Machain. Never doubting that the young doctor, like other lawyers, would undertake his unrighteous cause, Rodriguez opened to him his case, and requested, with a handsome retainer, his advocacy of it. Francia saw at once that his friend's pretensions were founded in fraud and injustice, and he not only refused to act as his counsel, but plainly told him, that much as he hated his antagonist Machain, yet if he, Rodriguez, persisted in his iniquitous suit, that antagonist should have his, Francia's, most zealous support. But covetousness, as Ahab's story shows us, is not so easily driven from its pretensions, and in spite of Francia's warning, Rodriguez persisted. As he was a potent man in point of fortune, always going against Machain and his devoted vineyard. At this stage of the question, Francia wrapped himself one night in his cloak, and walked to the house of his inveterate enemy, Machain. The slave who opened the door, knowing that his master and the doctor, like the houses of Montague and Capulet, were smoke in each other's eyes, refused the lawyer admittance, and ran to inform his master of the strange and unexpected visit. Machain, no less struck by the circumstance than his slave, for some time hesitated, but at length determined to admit Francia. In walked the silent doctor to Machain's chamber. All the papers connected with the law plea, voluminous enough I have been assured, were outspread upon the defendant's escritoire. Machain, said the lawyer, addressing him, you know I am your enemy. But I know that my friend Rodriguez meditates, and will certainly, unless I interfere, carry against you an act of gross and lawless aggression. I have come to offer my services in your defense. The astonished Machain could scarcely credit his senses, but poured forth the ebullition of his gratitude in terms of thankful acquiescence. The first escrito, or writing, sent in by Francia to the Juez de Alzada, or judge of the Court of Appeal, confounded the adverse advocates, and staggered the judge, who was in their interest. My friend, said the judge to the leading counsel, I cannot go forward in this matter, unless you bribe Dr. Francia to be silent. I will try, replied the advocate, and he went to Naboth's counsel with 100 doubloons, about 350 guineas, which he offered him as a bribe to let the cause take its iniquitous course. Considering, too, that his best introduction would be a hint that his douceur was offered with the judge's concurrence, the knavish lawyer hinted to the upright one that such was the fact. Siga usted, said Francia, con sus viles pensamientos, y vilissimo oro de mi casa. Out with your vile insinuations, and dross of gold from my house. Off marched the venal drudge of the unjust judge, and in a moment putting on his capote, the offended advocate went to the residence of the Juez de Alzada. Surely relating what had passed between himself and the myrmidon, sir, continued Francia, you are a disgrace to law, and a blot upon justice. You are, moreover, completely in my power, and unless tomorrow I have a decision in favor of my client, I will make your seat upon the bench too hot for you, and the insignia of your judicial office shall become the emblems of your shame. The Moro did bring a decision in favor of Francia's client. Naboth retained his vineyard, the judge lost his reputation, and the young doctor's fame extended far and wide. On the other hand, it is admitted that he quarreled with his father, in those days, and, as is reported, never spoke to him more. The subject of the quarrel is vaguely supposed to have been money matters. Francia is not accused of avarice, nay, is expressly acquitted of loving money, even by Renger. But he did hate injustice, and probably was not indisposed to allow himself, among others, a height of fair play. A rigorous, correct man, that will have a spade be a spade, a man of much learning in Creole law, and occult French sciences, of great talent, energy, fidelity, a man of some temper withal, unhappily subject to private hypochondria, black private thunderclouds, whence probably the origin of these lightnings, when you poke into him. He leads a lonesome self-secluded life, interrogating nature through mere star-glasses, and Abbé Raynal philosophies, who in that way will yield no very exuberant response. Mere law papers, advocate fees, civic officialities, renowns, and the wonder of Assumpcion Guachos, not so much as a pair of Andalusian eyes that can lasso him, except in a temporary way. This man seems to have got but a lean lease of nature, and may end in a rather shrunk condition. A century ago, with this atrabiliar earnestness of his, and such a reverberatory furnace of passions, inquiries, unspeakabilities burning in him, deep under cover, he might have made an excellent monk of Saint Dominic, fit almost for canonization, nay, an excellent superior of the Jesuits, Grand Inquisitor, or the like, had you developed him in that way. But, for all this, he is now a day too late. Monks of Saint Dominic that might have been, do now, instead of devotional raptures and miraculous suspensions in prayer, produce, brown accidental female infant? To sell flowers, in an indigent state, on the streets of Assumpcion. It is grown really a most barren time, and this Francia with his grim unspeakabilities, with his fiery splenetic humors, kept close under lock and key, what has he to look for in it? A post on the bench, in the municipal cabildo, nay, he is already a post in the cabildo, he has already been alcalde, Lord Mayor of Assumpcion, and ridden in such gilt coach as they had. He can look for little, one would say, but barren monies, barren Guacho world celebrities, Abbé Raynal philosophisms also very barren, wholly a barren life voyage of it, ending, in zero, thinks the Abbé Raynal? But no, the world wags not that way in those days. Far over the waters there have been federations of the Champ de Mars, guillotines, portable guillotines, and of French people risen against tyrants. There has been a sansculotism, speaking at last in cannon volleys and the crash of towns and nations over half the world. Sleek fat Pancho you San Juanto, sleek aristocratic Donathingism, sunk as in death sleep in its well-stuffed easy chair, or staggering in somnambulism on the housetops, seemed to itself to hear a voice say, "Sleep no more, Donathingism, Donathingism doth murder sleep." It was indeed a terrible explosion, that of sansculotism, commingling very Tartarus with the old established stars, fit, such a tumult was it, to awaken all but the dead. And out of it there had come Napoleonisms, Tamerlanisms, and then as a branch of these, conventions of Aranjuez, soon followed by Spanish juntas, Spanish Cortes, and, on the whole, a smiting broad awake of poor old Spain itself, much to its amazement. And naturally of New Spain next, its double amazement, seeing itself awake. And so, in the new hemisphere too, arise wild projects, angry arguings, arise armed gatherings in Santa Margarita Island with bolivars and invasions of Cumana, revolts of La Plata, revolts of this and then of that, the subterranean electric element, shock on shock, shaking and exploding, in the new hemisphere too, from sea to sea. Very astonishing to witness, from the year 1810 and onwards. Had Dr. Rodriguez Francia 3 ears, he would hear, as many eyes as Argus, he would gaze. He is all eye, he is all ear. A new, entirely different figure of existence is cut out for Dr. Rodriguez. The Paraguay people as a body, lying far inland, with little speculation in their heads, were in no haste to adopt the new republican gospel, but looked first how it would succeed in shaping itself into facts. Buenos Aires, Tucumán, most of the La Plata provinces, had made their revolutions, brought in the reign of liberty, and unluckily driven out the reign of law and regularity, before the Paraguanos could resolve on such an enterprise. Perhaps they are afraid. General Belgrano, with a force of 1,000 men, missioned by Buenos Aires, came up the river to countenance them, in the end of 1810, but was met on their frontier in array of war, was attacked, or at least was terrified, in the night watches, so that his men all fled, and on the morrow poor General Belgrano found himself not a countenancer, but one needing countenance, and was in a polite way sent down the river again. Not till a year after did the Paraguanos, by spontaneous movement, resolve on a career of freedom, resolve on getting some kind of Congress assembled, and the old government sent its ways. Francia, it is presumable, was active at once in exciting and restraining them. The fruit was now drop ripe, we may say, and fell by a shake. Our old royal governor went aside, worthy man, with some slight grimace, when ordered to do so. National Congress introduced itself, secretaries read papers, compiled chiefly out of Roland's ancient history, and we became a republic, with Don Fulgencio Yegros, one of the richest guachos and best horsemen of the province, for president, and 2 assessors with him, called also Vacal, or vowels, whose names escape us, Francia, as secretary, being naturally the consonant, or motive soul of the combination. This, as we group out the date, was in 1811. The Paraguay Congress, having completed this constitution, went home again to its field labors, hoping a good issue. Feebler light hardly ever dawned for the historical mind, than this which is shed for us by Renger, Robertsons, and Company, on the birth, cradling, baptismal processes, and early fortunes of the new Paraguay Republic. Through long vague, and, indeed, intrinsically vacant pages of their books, it lies grey, undecipherable, without form and void. Francia was secretary, and a republic did take place, this, as one small clear burning fact, shedding far a comfortable visibility, conceivability over the universal darkness, and making it into conceivable dusk with one rushlight fact in the center of it. This we do know, and, cheerfully yielding to necessity, decide that this shall suffice us to know. What more is there? Absurd somnolent persons, struck broad awake by the subterranean concussion of civil and religious liberty all over the world, meeting together to establish a republican career of freedom, and compile official papers out of Roland, are not a subject on which the historical mind can be enlightened. The historical mind, thank heaven, forgets such persons and their papers, as fast as you repeat them. Besides, these guacho populations are greedy, superstitious, vain, and, as Myers said in his haste, mendacious every soul of them. Within the confines of Paraguay, we know for certain but of one man who would do himself an injury to do a just or true thing under the sun, one man who understands in his heart that this universe is an eternal fact, and not some huge temporary pumpkin, saccharine, absinthian, the rest of its significance chimerical merely. Such men cannot have a history, though a Thucydides came to write it. Enough for us to understand that Don this was a vaporing blockhead, who followed his pleasures, his peculations, and Don that another of the same, that there occurred fatuities, mismanagements innumerable, then discontents, open grumblings, and, as a running accompaniment, intriguings, caballyings, outings, innings, till the government house, fouler than when the Jesuits had it, became a bottomless, pestilent inanity, insupportable to any articulate speaking soul, till Secretary Francia should feel that he, for one, could not be consonant to such a set of vowels, till Secretary Francia, one day, flinging down his papers, rising to his feet, should jerk out with oratorical vivacity his lean right hand, and say, with knit brows, in a low swift tone, Adieu, signores, God preserve you many years. Francia withdrew to his chacra, a pleasant country house in the woods of Chiapua not far off, there to interrogate nature, and live in a private manner. Parish Robertson, much about this date, which we grope and guess to have been perhaps in 1812, was boarded with a certain ancient Donna Juana, in that same region, had tertulias of unimaginable brilliancy, and often went shooting of an evening. On one of those, but he shall himself report. On one of those lovely evenings in Paraguay, after the southwest wind has both cleared and cooled the air, I was drawn, in my pursuit of game, into a peaceful valley, not far from Donna Juana's, and remarkable for its combination of all the striking features of the scenery of the country. Suddenly I came upon a neat and unpretending cottage. Up rose a partridge, I fired, and the bird came to the ground. A voice from behind called out, "Buen tiro, good shot." I turned round, and beheld a gentleman of about 50 years of age, dressed in a suit of black, with a large scarlet capote, or cloak, thrown over his shoulders. He had a mate cup in one hand, a cigar in the other, and a little urchin of a negro, with his arms crossed, was in attendance by the gentleman's side. This gentleman's countenance was dark, and his black eyes were very penetrating, while his jet hair, combed back from a bold forehead, and hanging in natural ringlets over his shoulders, gave him a dignified and striking air. He wore on his shoes large golden buckles, and at the knees of his breeches the same. In exercise of the primitive and simple hospitality common in the country, I was invited to sit down under the corridor, and to take a cigar and mate, cup of Paraguay tea, a celestial globe, a large telescope, and a theodolite were under the little portico, and I immediately inferred that the personage before me was no other than Dr. Francia. Yes, here for the first time in authentic history, a remarkable hearsay becomes a remarkable visuality, through a pair of clear human eyes, You look face to face on the very figure of the man. Is not this verily the exact record of those clear Robertsonian eyes, and seven senses, entered accurately, then and not afterwards, on the ledger of the memory? We will hope so, who can but hope so? The figure of the man will, at all events, be exact. Here too is the figure of his library. The conversation, if any, was of the last degree of insignificance, and may be left out, or supplied ad libitum. He introduced me to his library, in a confined room, with a very small window and that so shaded by the roof of the corridor, as to admit the least portion of light necessary for study. The library was arranged on 3 rows of shelves, extending across the room, and might have consisted of 300 volumes. There were many ponderous books on law, a few on the inductive sciences, some in French and some in Latin upon subjects of general literature, with Euclid's Elements, and some schoolboy treatises on algebra. On a large table were heaps of law papers and processes. Several folios bound in vellum were outspread upon it. A lighted candle, though placed there solely with a view to light cigars, lent its feeble aid to illumine the room, while a mate cup and inkstand, both of silver, stood on another part of the table. There was neither carpet nor mat on the brick floor, and the chairs were of such ancient fashion, size, and weight, that it required a considerable effort to move them from one spot to another. Peculation, malversation, the various forms of imbecility and voracious dishonesty, went their due course in the government offices of Assumption, unrestrained by Francia, and unrestrainable, till, as we may say, it reached a height, and, like other suppurations and diseased concretions in the living system, had to burst, and take itself away. To the eyes of Paraguay in general, it had become clear that such a reign of liberty was unendurable, that some new revolution, or change of ministry, was indispensable. Renger says that Francia withdrew more than once to his chakra, disgusted with his colleagues, who always, by unlimited promises and protestations, had to flatter him back again, and then anew disgusted him. Francia is the consonant of these absurd vowels. No business can go on without Francia. And the finances are deranged, insolvent, and the military, unpaid, ineffective, cannot so much as keep out the Indians, and there comes trouble and rumor of war from Buenos Aires. Alas, from what quarter of the great continent come there other than troubles and rumors of war? Patriot generals become traitor generals, get themselves shot in marketplaces, revolution follows revolution. Artigas, close on our borders, has begun harrying the Banda Oriental with fire and sword, dictating dispatches from cow skulls. Like clouds of wolves, only feller, being mounted on horseback, with pikes, the Indians dart in on us, carrying conflagration and dismay. Paraguay must get itself governed, or it will be worse for Paraguay. The eyes of Paraguay, we can well fancy, turn to the one man of talent they have, the one man of veracity they have. In 1813 a second Congress is got together. We fancy it was Francia's last advice to the government suppuration, when it flattered him back for the last time, to ask his advice. That such suppuration do now dissolve itself, and a new Congress be summoned. In the new Congress, the vocal are voted out, Francia and Fulgencio are named joint consuls, with Francia for consul, and Don Fulgencio Yegros for consultize cloak. It may be better. Don Fulgencio rides about in gorgeous sash and epaulets, a rich man and horse subduer, good as a consul's cloak, but why should the real consul have a cloak? Next year in the Third Congress, Francia, by insidious maneuvering, by favor of the military, and, indeed, also in some sort, we may say, by law of nature, gets himself declared dictator. 3 years, or for life, may in these circumstances mean much the same. This was in 1814. Francia never assembled any Congress more, having stolen the constitutional palladiums, and insidiously got his wicked will. Of a Congress that compiled constitutions out of Roland, who would not lament such destiny? This Congress should have met again. It was indeed, say Renger and the Robertsons themselves, such a Congress as never met before in the world, a Congress which knew not its right hand from its left, which drank infinite rum in the taverns, and had one wish, that of getting on horseback, home to its field husbandry and partridge shooting. The military mostly favored Francia, being gained over by him, the thief of constitutional palladiums. With Francia's entrance on the government as consul, still more as dictator, a great improvement, it is granted even by Renger, did in all quarters forthwith show itself. The finances were husbanded, were accurately gathered, every official person in Paraguay had to bethink him, and begin doing his work, instead of merely seeming to do it. The soldiers Francia took care to see paid and drilled, to see march, with real death shot in service, when the Indians or other enemies showed themselves. Guardias, guardhouses, at short distances, were established along the river's bank and all round the dangerous frontiers. Wherever the Indian centaur troops showed face, an alarm cannon went off, and soldiers, quickly assembling, with actual death shot in service, were upon them. These wolf hordes had to vanish into the heart of their deserts again. The land had peace. Neither Artigas, nor any of the firebrands and war plagues which were distracting South America from side to side, could get across the border. All negotiation or intercommuning with Buenos Aires, or with any of these war-distracted countries, was peremptorily waived. To no Congress of Lima, General Congress of Panama, or other general or particular Congress would Francia, by deputy or message, offer the smallest recognition. All South America raging and ravening like one huge dog kennel gone rabid, we here in Paraguay have peace, and cultivate our tea trees, why should we not let well alone? By degrees, one thing acting on another, and this ring of frontier guardhouses being already erected there, a rigorous sanitary line, impregnable as brass, was drawn round all Paraguay, no communication, import or export trade allowed, except by the dictator's license, given on payment of the due monies, when the political horizon seemed innocuous, refused when otherwise. The dictator's trade licenses were a considerable branch of his revenues, his entrance dues, somewhat onerous to the foreign merchant, think the Messrs. Robertson, were another. Paraguay stood isolated, the rabid dog kennel raging round it, wide as South America, but kept out as by lock and key. These were vigorous measures, gradually coming on the somnolent Guacho population. It seems, meanwhile, that, even after the perpetual dictatorship, and onwards to the 5th or the 6th year of Francia's government, there was, though the constitutional palladiums were stolen, nothing very special to complain of. Paraguay had peace, sat under its tea tree, the rabid dog kennel, Indians, Artillano and other war firebrands, all shut out from it. But in that year 1819, the second year of the perpetual dictatorship, there arose, not for the first time, dim indications of plots, even dangerous plots. In that year the firebrand Artigas was finally quenched, obliged to beg a lodging even of Francia, his enemy, and got it, hospitably though contemptuously. And now straightway there advanced, from Artigas's lost, wasted country, a certain General Ramirez, his rival and victor, and fellow bandit and firebrand. This General Ramirez advanced up to our very frontier, first, with offers of alliance, failing that, with offers of war, on which latter offer he was closed with, was cut to pieces, and a letter was found about him, addressed to Don Fulgencio Yegros, the rich Guacho horseman and ex-consul, which arrested all the faculties of Dr. Francia's most intense intelligence, there and then. A conspiracy, with Don Fulgencio at the head of it, conspiracy which seems the wider spread the farther one investigates it, which has been brewing itself these 2 years, and now on Good Friday next is to be burst out, starting with the massacre of Dr. Francia and others, whatever it may close with. Francia was not a man to be trifled with in plots. He looked, watched, investigated, till he got the exact extent, position, nature, and structure of this plot fully in his eye, and then he pounced on it like a gleed falcon, like a fierce condor, suddenly from the invisible blue, struck beak and claws into the very heart of it, tore it into small fragments, and consumed it on the spot. It is Francia's way. This was the last plot, though not the first plot, Francia ever heard of during his perpetual dictatorship. It is, as we find, over these 3 or these 2 years, while the Fulgencio plot is getting itself pounced upon and torn in pieces, that the reign of terror, properly so called, extends. Over these 3 or these 2 years only, though the running shriek of it confuses all things to the end of the chapter. It was in this stern period that Francia executed above 40 persons. Not entirely inexplicable. Par Dios, ye shall not conspire against me, I will not allow it. The career of freedom, be it known to all men, and Guachos, is not yet begun in this country, I am still only casting out the 7 devils. My lease of Paraguay, a harder one than your stupidity suppose, is for life, the contract is, thou must die if thy lease be taken from thee. Aim not at my life, ye constitutional Guachos, or let it be a diviner man than Don Fulgencio, the horse subduer, that does it. By heaven, if you aim at my life, I will bid you have a care of your own. He executed upwards of 40 persons. How many he arrested, flogged, cross-questioned, for he is an inexorable man. If you are guilty, or suspected of guilt, it will go ill with you here. Francia's arrest, carried by a grenadier, arrives, you are in straight prison, you are in Francia's bodily presence, those sharp St. Dominic eyes, that diabolic intellect, prying into you, probing, cross-questioning you, till the secret cannot be hid, till the 3-ball cartridges are handed to a sentry, and your doom is radamanthine. But the plots, as we say, having ceased by this rough surgery, it would appear that there was, for the next 20 years, little or no more of it, little or no use for more. The reign of terror, one begins to find, was properly a reign of rigor, which would become terrible enough if you infringed the rules of it, but which was peaceable otherwise, regular otherwise? Let this, amid the running shriek, which will and should run its full length in such circumstances, be well kept in mind. It happened too, as Renger tells us, in the same year, 1820, as we grope and gather, that a visitation of locusts, as sometimes occurs, destroyed all the crops of Paraguay, and there was no prospect but of universal dearth or famine. The crops are done, eaten by locusts, the summer at an end. We have no foreign trade, or next to none, and never had almost any. What will become of Paraguay and its Guachos? In Guachos is no hope, no help, but in a Dionysius of the Guachos? Dictator Francia, led by occult French sciences and natural sagacity, nay, driven by necessity itself, peremptorily commands the farmers throughout all Paraguay to sow a certain portion of their lands anew, with or without hope, under penalties. The result was a moderately good harvest still. The result was a discovery that 2 harvests were, every year, possible in Paraguay, that agriculture, a rigorous dictator presiding over it, could be infinitely improved there. As Paraguay has about 100,000 square miles of territory mostly fertile, and only some 2 souls planted on each square mile thereof, it seemed to the dictator that this, and not foreign trade, might be a good course for his Paraguanos. This accordingly, and not foreign trade, in the present state of the political horizon, was the course resolved on, the course persisted in, with evident advantages, says Renger. Thus, one thing acting on another, domestic plot, hanging on Artigas's country from without, and locust swarms with improvement of husbandry in the interior, and those guardhouses all already there, along the frontier, Paraguay came more and more to be hermetically closed, and Francia reigned over it, for the rest of his life, as a rigorous Dionysius of Paraguay, without foreign intercourse, or with such only as seemed good to Francia. How the dictator, now secure in possession, did manage this huge Paraguay, which, by strange insidious and other means, had fallen in life least to him, and was his to do the best he could with, it were interesting to know. What the meaning of him, the result of him actually was? One desiderates some biography of Francia by a native. Meanwhile, in the Aesthetische Briefwechsel of Herr Professor Sauertag, a work not yet known in England, nor treating specially of this subject, we find, scattered at distant intervals, a remark or two which may be worth translating. Professor Sauertag, an open soul looking with clear eye and large recognizing heart over all accessible quarters of the world, has cast a sharp sunglance here and there into Dr. Francia too. These few philosophical remarks of his, and then a few anecdotes gleaned elsewhere, such as the barren ground yields, must comprise what more we have to say of Francia. Pity, exclaimed Sauertag once, that a nation cannot reform itself, as the English are now trying to do, by what their newspapers call tremendous cheers. Alas, it cannot be done. Reform is not joyous but grievous. No single man can reform himself without stern suffering and stern working. How much less can a nation of men? The serpent sheds not his old skin without rusty disconsolateness. He is not happy but miserable. In the water cure itself, do you not sit steeped for months, washed to the heart in elemental drenchings, and like Job, are made to curse your day? Reforming of a nation is a terrible business. Thus, too, Medea, when she made men young again, was wont, du Himmel, to hew them in pieces, with meat axes, cast them into cauldrons, and boil them for a length of time. How much handier could they but have done it by tremendous cheers alone? Like a drop of surgical antiseptic liquid, poured, by the benign powers, as I fancy, into boundless brutal corruptions, very sharp, very caustic, corrosive enough, this tawny tyrannous Dr. Francia, in the interior of the South American continent, he, too, is one of the elements of the grand phenomenon there. A monstrous molting process taking place, monstrous gluttonous boa constrictor, he is of length from Panama to Patagonia, shedding his old skin, whole continent getting itself chopped to pieces, and boiled in the Medea cauldron, to become young again, unable to manage it by tremendous cheers alone. What they say about love of power amounts to little. Power? Love of power merely to make flunkies come and go for you is a love, I should think, which enters only into the minds of persons in a very infantine state. A grown man, like this Dr. Francia, who wants nothing, as I am assured, but 3 cigars daily, a cup of mate, and 4 ounces of butcher's meat with brown bread, the whole world and its united flunkies, taking constant thought of the matter, can do nothing for him but that only. That he already has, and has had always. Why should he, not being a minor, love flunky power? He loves to see you about him, with your flunky promptitudes, with your grimaces, adulations, and shun loyalty. You are so beautiful, a daily and hourly feast to the eye and soul. Ye unfortunates, From his heart rises one prayer, that the last created flunky had vanished from this universe, never to appear more. And yet truly a man does tend, and must under frightful penalties perpetually tend, to be king of his world, to stand in his world as what he is, a center of light and order, not of darkness and confusion. A man loves power, yes, if he sees disorder his eternal enemy rampant about him, he does love to see said enemy in the way of being conquered. He can have no rest till that come to pass. Your Muhammad can bear a rent cloak, but clouts it with his own hands, how much more a rent country, a rent world? He has to imprint the image of his own veracity upon the world, and shall, and must, and will do it, more or less. It is at his peril if he neglect any great or any small possibility he may have of this. Francia's inner flame is but a meager, blue burning one, let him irradiate midnight Paraguay with it, such as it is. Nay, on the whole, how cunning is nature in getting her farms leased. Is it not a blessing this Paraguay can get the one voracious man it has, to take lease of it, in these sad circumstances? His farm profits, and whole wages, it would seem, amount only to what is called nothing and find yourself. Spartan food and lodging, solitude, 2 cigars, and a cup of mate daily, he already had. Truly, it would seem, as Sauertag remarks, Dictator Francia had not a very joyous existence of it, in this his life lease of Paraguay. Casting out of 7 devils from a Guacho population is not joyous at all, both exorcist and exorcised find it sorrowful. Meanwhile, it does appear, there was some improvement made, no veritable labor, not even a Dr. Francia's, is in vain. Of Francia's improvements there might as much be said of his cruelties or rigors, for indeed, at bottom, the one was in proportion to the other. He improved agriculture, not 2 ears of corn where only one grew, but 2 harvests of corn, as we have seen. He introduced schools, boarding schools, elementary schools, and others, on which Renger has a chapter. Everywhere he promoted education, as he could, repressed superstition as he could. Strict justice between man was enforced in his law courts. He himself would accept no gift, not even a trifle, in any case whatever. Renger, on packing up for departure, had left in his hands, not from forgetfulness, a print of Napoleon, worth some shillings in Europe, but invaluable in Paraguay, where Francia, who admired this hero much, had hitherto seen no likeness of him but a Nuremberg caricature. Francia sent an express after Renger, to ask what the value of the print was. No value, Renger could not sell prints, it was much at His Excellency's service. His Excellency straightway returned it. An exact, decisive man. Peculation, idleness, ineffectuality, had to cease in all the public offices of Paraguay. So far as lay in Francia, no public and private man in Paraguay was allowed to slur his work. All public and all private men, so far as lay in Francia, were forced to do their work or die. We might define him as the born enemy of quacks, one who has from nature a heart hatred of unveracity in man or in thing, wheresoever he sees it. Of persons who do not speak the truth, and do not act the truth, he has a kind of diabolic divine impatience. They had better disappear out of his neighborhood. Poor Francia, his light was but a very sulphurous, meager, blue-burning one, but he irradiated Paraguay with it, as our professor says, the best he could. That he had to maintain himself alive all the while, and would suffer no man to glance contradiction at him, but instantaneously repressed all such, this too we need no ghost to tell us, this lay in the very nature of the case. His lease of Paraguay was a life lease. He had his 3-ball cartridges ready for whatever man he found aiming at his life. He had frightful prisons. He had to go far up among the wastes, a kind of Paraguay Siberia, to which unruly persons, not yet got the length of shooting, were relegated. The main exiles, Renger says, were drunken mulattoes, and the class called unfortunate females. They lived miserably there, became a sadder, and perhaps a wiser, body of mulattoes and unfortunate females. But let us listen for a moment to the Reverend Manuel Perez as he preaches, in the Church of the Incarnation at Asunción, on the 20th of October, 1840, in a tone somewhat nasal, yet trustworthy withal. His funeral discourse, translated into a kind of English, presents itself still audible in the Argentine News of Buenos Aires, number 813. We select some passages, studying to abate the nasal tone a little, to reduce, if possible, the Argentine English under the law of grammar. It is the worst translation in the world, and does poor Manuel Perez one knows not what injustice. This funeral discourse has much surprised the able editor, it seems, has led him perhaps to ask, or be readier for asking, whether all that confused loud litanying about reign of terror, and so forth, was not possibly of a rather long-eared nature? Amid the convulsions of revolution, says the Reverend Manuel, the Lord, looking down with pity on Paraguay, raised up Don José Gaspar Francia for its deliverance. And when, In the words of Ray text, the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised up a deliverer to the children of Israel, who delivered them. What measures did not His Excellency devise, what labors undergo, to preserve peace in the Republic at home, and place it in an attitude to command respect from abroad? His first care was directed to obtain supplies of arms, and to discipline soldiers. To all that would import arms he held out the inducement of exemption from duty, and the permission to export and return whatever produce they preferred. An abundant supply of excellent arms was, by these means, obtained. I am lost in wonder to think how this great man could attend to such a multiplicity of things. He applied himself to study of the military art, and, in a short time, taught the exercise, and directed military evolutions like the skillfulest veteran. Often have I seen His Excellency go up to a recruit, and show him by example how to take aim at the target. Could any Paraguayno think it other than honorable to carry a musket, when his dictator taught him how to manage it? The cavalry exercise too, though it seems to require a man at once robust and experienced in horsemanship, His Excellency as you know did himself superintend. At the head of his squadrons he charged and maneuvered, as if bred to it, and directed them with an energy and vigor which infused his own martial spirit into these troops. What evils do not the people suffer from highwaymen? Exclaims His Reverence, a little farther on, violence, plunder, murder, are crimes familiar to these malefactors. The inaccessible mountains and wide deserts in this republic seem to offer impunity to such men. Our dictator succeeded in striking such a terror into them that they entirely disappeared, seeking safety and a change of life. His Excellency saw that the manner of inflicting the punishment was more efficacious than even the punishment itself, and on this principle he acted. Whenever a robber could be seized, he was led to the nearest guardhouse, Guardia, a summary trial took place, and, straightway, so soon as he had made confession, he was shot. These means proved effectual. Ere long the Republic was in such security, that, we may say, a child might have traveled from the Uruguay to the Paraná without other protection than the dread which the Supreme Dictator inspired. This is saying something, Your Reverence. But what is all this compared to the demon of anarchy? Oh! Exclaims His Simple Reverence, oh, my friends, would I had the talent to paint to you the miseries of a people that fall into anarchy? And was not our Republic on the very eve of this? Yes, brethren. It behoved His Excellency to be prompt, to smother the enemy in his cradle. He did so. He seized the leaders, brought to summary trial, they were convicted of high treason against the country. What a struggle now, for His Excellency, between the law of duty and the voice of feeling, if feeling to any extent there were. I, exclaimed His Reverence, am confident that had the doom of imprisonment on those persons seemed sufficient for the state's peace, His Excellency never would have ordered their execution. It was unavoidable, nor was it avoided, it was done. Brethren, should not I hesitate, lest it be a profanation of the sacred place I now occupy, if I seem to approve sanguinary measures in opposition to the mildness of the gospel? Brethren, no. God Himself approved the conduct of Solomon in putting Joab and Adonijah to death. Life is sacred, thinks His Reverence, but there is something more sacred still, woe to him who does not know that withal. Alas, Your Reverence, Paraguay has not yet succeeded in abolishing capital punishment, then. But indeed neither has nature, anywhere that I hear of, yet succeeded in abolishing it. Act with the due degree of perversity, you are sure enough of being violently put to death, in hospital or highway, by dyspepsia, delirium tremens, or stuck through by the kindled rage of your fellowmen. What can a friend of humanity do I twaddle in Exeter Hall or elsewhere, till he become a bore to us, and perhaps worse? An advocate in Arras once gave up a good judicial appointment, and retired into frugality and privacy, rather than doom one culprit to die by law. The name of this advocate, let us mark it well, was Maximilian Robespierre. There are sweet kinds of twaddle that have a deadly virulence of poison concealed in them, like the sweetness of sugar of lead. Were it not better to make just laws, think you, and then execute them strictly, as the gods still do? His Excellency next directed his attention to purging the state from another class of enemies, says Perez in the Incarnation Church, the peculating tax-gatherers, namely. Vigilantly detecting their frauds, he made them refund for what was past, and took precautions against the like in future. All their accounts were to be handed in, for his examination, once every year. The habit of His Excellency when he delivered out articles for the supply of the public, that prolix and minute counting of things apparently unworthy of his attention, had its origin in the same motive. I believe that he did so, less from a want of confidence in the individuals lately appointed for this purpose, than from a desire to show them with what delicacy they should proceed. Hence likewise his ways, in scrupulously examining every piece of artisan's workmanship. Republic of Paraguay, how art thou indebted to the toils, the vigils and cares of our perpetual dictator! It seemed as if this extraordinary man were endowed with ubiquity, to attend to all thy wants and exigences. Whilst in his closet, he was traversing thy frontiers to place thee in an attitude of security. What devastation did not those inroads of Indians from the Chaco occasion to the inhabitants of Rio Abajo? Ever and anon there reached Asuncion tidings of the terror and affliction caused by their incursions. Which of us hoped that evils so widespread, ravages so appalling, could be counteracted? Our dictator, nevertheless, did devise effectual ways of securing that part of the Republic. 4 respectable fortresses with competent garrisons have been the impregnable barrier which has restrained the eruptions of those ferocious savages. Inhabitants of Rio Abajo, rest tranquil in your homes, you are a portion of the people whom the Lord confided to the care of our dictator, you are safe. The precautions and wise measures he adopted to repel force, and drive back the savages to the north of the Republic, the fortresses of Climpo, of San Carlos de Apa, placed on the best footing for defense, the orders and instructions furnished to the Villa de la Concepcion, secured that quarter of the Republic under attack from all. The Great Wall, ditch, and fortress on the opposite bank of the river Paraná, the force and judicious arrangement of the troops distributed over the interior and the south of our Republic, have commanded the respect of its enemies in that quarter. The beauty, the symmetry odd good taste displayed in the building of cities convey an advantageous idea of their inhabitants, continues Perez, thus thought Caractacus, king of the Angles, thus think most persons. His Excellency, glancing at the condition of the capital of the Republic, saw a city in disorder and without police, streets without regularity, houses built according to the caprice of their owners. But enough, O Perez, for it becomes too nasal. Perez, with a confident face, asks, in fine, whether all these things do not clearly prove to men and guachos of sense, that dictator Francia was the deliverer whom the Lord raised up to deliver Paraguay from its enemies. Truly, O Perez, the benefits of him seem to have been considerable. Undoubtedly a man sent by heaven, as all of us are. Nay, it may be, the benefit of him is not even yet exhausted, even yet entirely become visible. Who knows but, in unborn centuries, Paraguayno men will look back to their lean iron Francia, as men do, in such cases, to the one voracious person, and institute considerations. Oliver Cromwell, dead 200 years, does yet speak, nay, perhaps, now first begins to speak. The meaning and meanings of the one true man, never so lean and limited, starting up direct from nature's heat, in this bewildered guacho world, gone far away from nature, are endless. The Messrs. Robertson are very merry on this attempt of Francia's to rebuild on a better plan the city of Asuncion. The city of Asuncion, full of tropical vegetation and permanent hedges, the deposits of nuisance and vermin, has no pavement, no straightness of streets, the sandy thoroughfare, in some quarters, is torn by the rain into gullies, impassable with convenience to any animal but a kangaroo. Francia, after meditation, decides on having it remodeled, paved, straightened, irradiated with the image of the one regular man. Robertson laughs to see a dictator, sovereign ruler, straddling about, taking observations with his theodolite, and so forth. O Robertson, if there was no other man that could observe with a theodolite? Nay, it seems further, the improvement of Asuncion was attended, once more, with the dreadfulest tyrannies, peaceable citizens dreaming no harm, no active harm to any soul, but mere peaceable passive dirt and irregularity to all souls, were ordered to pull down their houses which happened to stand in the middle of streets, forced, under rustle of the gallows, to draw their purses, and rebuild them elsewhere. It is horrible. Nay, they said Francia's true aim in these improvements, in this cutting down of the luxuriant cross hedges and architectural monstrosities, was merely to save himself from being shot, from under cover, as he rode through the place. It may be so, but Asuncion is now an improved, paved city, much squarer in the corners, and with the planned capacity, it seems, of growing ever squarer, passable with convenience, not to kangaroos only, but to wooden bullock carts and all vehicles and animals. Indeed our Messrs. Robertson find something comic as well as tragic in Dictator Francia, and enliven their running shriek, all through this reign of terror, with a pleasant vein of conventional satire. One evening, for example, a Robertson being about to leave Paraguay for England, and having waited upon Francia to make the parting compliments, Francia, to the Robertsons' extreme astonishment, orders in a large bale of goods, orders them to be opened on the table there, tobacco, poncho cloth, and other produce of the country, all of first-rate quality, and with the prices ticketed. These goods this, astonished Robertson is to carry to the bar of the House of Commons, and there to say, in such fashion and phraseology as a native may know to be suitable, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Francia is dictator of Paraguay, a country of tropical fertility, and 100,000 square miles in utent, producing these commodities at these prices. With nearly all foreign nations he declines altogether to trade, but with the English, such is his notion of them, he is willing and desirous to trade. These are his commodities, in endless quantity, of this quality, at these prices. He wants arms for his part. What say you, Mr. Speaker? Sure enough, our Robertson, arriving at the bar of the House of Commons with such a message, would have cut an original figure. Not to the House of Commons was this message properly addressed, but to the English nation, which Francia, idiot-like, supposed to be somehow represented, and made accessible and addressable in the House of Commons. It was a strange imbecility in any dictator. The Robertson, we find accordingly, did not take this bale of goods to the bar of the House of Commons, nay, what was far worse, he did not, owing to accidents, go to England at all, or bring any arms back to Francia at all. Hence, indeed, Francia's unreasonable detestation of him, hardly to be restrained within the bounds of common politeness. A man who said he would do, and then did not do, was at no time a kind of man admirable to Francia. Large sections of this reign of terror are a sort of unmusical sonata, or free duet with variations, to this text: how unadmirable a hide merchant that does not keep his word, how censurable, not to say ridiculous and imbecile, the one of common politeness in a dictator. Francia was a man that liked performance, and sham performance, in Paraguay as elsewhere, was a thing too universal. What a time of it had this strict man with unreal performers, imaginary workmen, public and private, cleric and laic. Ye guachos, it is no child's play casting out those 7 devils from you. Monastic or other entirely slumberous church establishments could expect no great favor from Francia. Such of them as seemed incurable, entirely slumberous, he somewhat roughly shook awake, somewhat sternly ordered to be gone. Debout canaille fainéanti, as his prophet Raynal says, Debout, O champs, O ateliers. Can I have you sit here, droning old meter through your nose, your heart asleep in mere gluttony, the while, and all Paraguay a wilderness or nearly so, the heavens blessed sunshine growing mere tangles, lianas, yellow fevers, rattlesnakes, and jaguars on it. Up, swift, to work, or mark this governmental horsewhip, what the crack of it is, what the cut of it is like to be, incurable, for one class, seemed archbishops, bishops, and such like, given merely to a sham warfare against extinct devils. At the crack of Francia's terrible whip they went, dreading what the cut of it might be. A cheap worship in Paraguay, according to the humor of the people, Francia left, on condition that it did no mischief. Wooden saints and the like where, he also left sitting in their niches, no new ones, even on solicitation, would he give a droit to buy. Being petitioned to provide a new patron saint for one of his new fortifications once, he made this answer: O people of Paraguay, how long will you continue idiots? While I was a Catholic I thought as you do, but I now see there are no saints but good canons that will guard our frontiers. This also is noteworthy. He inquired of the 2 Swiss surgeons, what then religion was, and then added, be of what religion you like, here, Christians, Jews, Mussulmans, but don't be atheists. Equal trouble had Francia with his laic workers, and indeed with all manner of workers, for it is in Paraguay as elsewhere, like priest-like people. Francia had extensive barrack buildings, nay city buildings, as we have seen, armed furnishings, immensities of work going on, and his workmen had in general a tendency to be imaginary. He could get no work out of them, only a more or less deceptive similitude of work. Masons, so-called, builders of houses did not build, but merely seemed to build. Their walls would not bear weather, stand on their bases in high winds. Hodge razors, in all conceivable kinds, were openly marketed, which were never meant to shave, but only to be sold. For a length of time Francia's righteous soul struggled sore, yet unexplosively, with the propensities of these unfortunate men. By rebuke, by remonstrance, encouragement, offers of reward, and every vigilance and effort, he strove to convince them that it was unfortunate for a son of Adam to be an imaginary workman, that every son of Adam had better make razors which were meant to shave. In vain, all in vain. At length Francia lost patience with them. Thou wretched fraction, wilt thou be the 9th part even of a tailor? Does it beseem thee to weave cloth of devil's dust instead of true wool, and cut and sew it as if thou wert not a tailor, but the fraction of a very tailor? I cannot endure everything. Francia, in despair, erected his workmen's gallows. Yes, that institution of the country did actually exist in Paraguay. Men and workmen saw it with eyes. A most remarkable, and on the whole, not unbeneficial institution of society there. Robertson gives us the following scene with the belt maker of Assumpcion, which, be it literal, or in part poetic, does, no doubt of it, hold the mirror up to nature in an altogether true, and surely in a surprising manner. In came, one afternoon, a poor shoemaker, with a couple of grenadier's belts, neither according to the fancy of the dictator. Sentinel, said he, and in came the sentinel, when the following conversation ensued. Dictator, take this bribonazzo, a very favorite word of the dictator's, and which being interpreted, means most impertinent scoundrel, take this bribonazzo to the gibbet over the way, walk him under it half a dozen times, and now, said he, turning to the trembling shoemaker, bring me such another pair of belts, and instead of walking under the gallows, we shall try how you can swing upon it. Shoemaker, please your excellency, I have done my best. Dictator, well, bribon, if this be your best, I shall do my best to see that you never again mar a bit of the state's leather. The belts are of no use to me, but they will do very well to hang you upon the little framework which the grenadier will show you. Shoemaker, God bless your excellency, the Lord forbid. I am your vassal, your slave, day and night have I served, and will serve my lord, only give me 2 days more to prepare the belts, why por el alma de un triste zapatero, by the soul of a poor shoemaker, I will make them to your excellency's liking. Dictator, off with him, sentinel. Sentinel, venga, bribon, come along, you rascal. Shoemaker, Senor Excellentissimo, this very night I will make the belts according to your excellency's pattern. Dictator, well, you shall have till the morning, but still you must pass under the gibbet, it is a salutary process, and may at once quicken the work and improve the workmanship. Sentinel, vamonos, bribon, the supreme commands it. Off was the shoemaker marched, he was, according to orders, passed and repassed under the gibbet, and then allowed to retire to his stall. He worked there with such an alacrity and sibylline enthusiasm, all night, that his belts on the morrow were without parallel in South America, and he is now, if still in this life, belt maker general to Paraguay, a prosperous man, grateful to Francia and the gallows, we may hope for casting certain of the 7 devils out of him. Such an institution of society would evidently not be introducible, under that simple form, in our old constituted European countries. Yet it may be asked of constitutional persons in these times, by what succedaneum they mean to supply the want of it, then? In a community of imaginary workmen, how can you pretend to have any government, or social thing whatever, that were real? Certain 10-pound franchisers, with their tremendous cheers, are invited to reflect on this. With a community of quack workmen, it is by the law of nature impossible that other than a quack government can be got to exist. Constitutional or other, with ballot boxes or with none, your society in all its phases, administration, legislation, teaching, preaching, praying, and writing periodicals per sheet, will be a quack society, terrible to live in, disastrous to look upon. Such an institution of society, adapted to our European ways, seems pressingly desirable. O guachos, South American and European, what a business is it, casting out your 7 devils. But perhaps the reader would like to take a view of Dr. Francia in the concrete, there as he looks and lives, managing that 1,000-sided business for his Paraguanos, in the time of Surgeon Renger? It is our last extract, or last view of the dictator, who must hang no longer on our horizon here. I have already said that Dr. Francia, so soon as he found himself at the head of affairs, took up his residence in the habitation of the former governors of Paraguay. This edifice, which is one of the largest in Asunción, was erected by the Jesuits, a short time before their expulsion, as a house of retreat for laymen, who devoted themselves to certain spiritual exercises instituted by St. Ignatius. This structure the dictator repaired and embellished, he has detached it from the other houses in the city, by interposing wide streets. Here he lives, with 4 slaves, a little Negro, 1 male and 2 female mulattoes, whom he treats with great mildness. The 2 males perform the functions of valet de chambre and groom. One of the 2 mulatto women is his cook, and the other takes care of his wardrobe. He leads a very regular life. The first rays of the sun very rarely find him in bed. So soon as he rises, the Negro brings a chafing dish, a kettle, and a pitcher of water. The water is made to boil there. The dictator then prepares, with the greatest possible care, his mate, or Paraguay tea. Having taken this, he walks under the interior colonnade that looks upon the court, and smokes a cigar, which he first takes care to unroll, in order to ascertain that there is nothing dangerous in it, though it is his own sister who makes up his cigars for him. At 6 o'clock comes the barber, an ill-washed, ill-clad mulatto, given to drink to, but the only member of the faculty whom he trusts in. If the dictator is in good humor, he chats with the barber, and often in this manner makes use of him to prepare the public for his projects. This barber may be said to be his official gazette. He then steps out, in his dressing gown of printed calico, to the outer colonnade, an open space with pillars, which ranges all round the building. Here he walks about, receiving at the same time such persons as are admitted to an audience. Towards 7, he withdraws to his room, where he remains till 9. The officers and other functionaries then come to make their reports, and receive his orders. At 11 o'clock, the fiel del fecho, principal secretary, brings the papers which are to be inspected by him, and writes from his dictation till noon. At noon all the officers retire, and Dr. Francia sits down to table. His dinner, which is extremely frugal, he always himself orders. When the cook returns from market, she deposits her provisions at the door of her master's room. The doctor then comes out and selects what he wishes for himself. After dinner he takes his siesta. On awakening, he drinks his mate, and smokes a cigar, with the same precautions as in the morning. From this till 4 or 5, he occupies himself with business, when the escort to attend him on his promenade arrives. The barber then enters and dresses his hair, while his horse is getting ready. During his ride, the doctor inspects the public works and the barracks, particularly those of the cavalry, where he has had a set of apartments prepared for his own use. While riding, though surrounded by his escort, he is armed with a saber, and a pair of double-barreled pocket pistols. He returns home about nightfall, and sits down to study till 9, then he goes to supper, which consists of a roast pigeon and a glass of wine. If the weather be fine, he again walks in the outer colonnade, where he often remains till a very late hour. At 10 o'clock he gives the watchword. On returning into the house, he fastens all the doors himself. Francia's brother was already mad. Francia banished this sister by and by, because she had employed one of his grenadiers, one of the public government soldiers, on some errand of her own. Thou lonely Francia! Francia's escort of cavalry used to strike men with the flat of their swords, much more assault them with angry epithets, if they neglected to salute the dictator as he rode out. Both he and they, moreover, kept a sharp eye for assassins, but never found any, thanks perhaps to their watchfulness. Had Francia been in Paris, at one time, also, there arose annoyance in the dictatorial mind from idle crowds gazing about his government house, and his proceedings there. Orders were given that all people were to move on, about their affairs, straight across this government esplanade. Instructions to the sentry, that if any person paused to gaze, he was to be peremptorily bidden, move on, and if he still did not move, to be shot with ball cartridge. All Paraguay men moved on, looking to the ground, swift as possible, straight as possible, through those precarious spaces, and the affluence of crowds thinned itself almost to the verge of solitude. One day, after many weeks or months, a human figure did loiter, did gaze in the forbidden ground. Move on, cried the sentry, sharply, no effect, move on. And again none. Alas, the unfortunate human figure was an Indian, did not understand human speech, stood merely gaping interrogatively, whereupon a shot belches forth at him, the hooing of winged lead, which luckily only hooed, and did not hit. The astonishment of the Indian must have been great, his retreat pace rapid. As for Francia, he summoned the sentry with hardly suppressed rage. What news, amigo? The sentry quoted your excellency's order. Francia cannot recollect such an order, commands now, that at all events such orders cease. It remains still that we say a word, not in excuse, which might be difficult, but in explanation, which is possible enough, of Francia's unforgivable insult to human science in the person of M. Amy Bonpland. M. Amy Bonpland, friend of Humboldt, after much botanical wandering, did, as all men know, settle himself in Entre Rios, an Indian or Jesuit country close on Francia, now burnt to ashes by Artigas, and there set up a considerable establishment for the improved culture of Paraguay tea. Botany? Why, yes, and perhaps commerce still more. Botany! Exclaims Francia, it is shopkeeping agriculture, and tends to prove fatal to my shop. Who is this extraneous individual? Artigas could not give him right to Entre Rios. Entre Rios is at least as much mine as Artigas's. Bring him to me. Next night, or next, Paraguay soldiers surround M. Bonpland's tea establishment, gallop M. Bonpland over the frontiers, to his appointed village in the interior, root out his tea plants, scatter his 400 Indians, and, we know the rest. Hard-hearted monopoly refusing to listen to the charmings of public opinion or rural society presidents, charm they never so wisely. M. Bonpland, at full liberty some time since, resides still in South America, and is expected by the Robertsons, not altogether by this editor, to publish his narrative, with a due running shriek. Francia's treatment of Artigas, his old enemy, the bandit and firebrand, reduced now to beg shelter of him, was good, humane, even dignified. Francia refused to see or treat with such a person, as he had ever done, but readily granted him a place of residence in the interior, and 30 piastres a month till he died. The bandit cultivated fields, did charitable deeds, and passed a life of penitence, for his few remaining years. His bandit followers, who took to plundering again, says Amrenger, were instantly seized and shot. On the other hand, that anecdote of Francia's dying father requires to be confirmed. It seems, the old man, who, as we saw, had long since quarreled with his son, was dying, and wished to be reconciled. Francia was busy. What was in it? Could not come. A second still more pressing message arrives. The old father dare not die unless he sees his son, fears he shall never enter heaven, if they be not reconciled. Then let him enter, said Francia, I will not come. If this anecdote be true, it is certainly, of all that are in circulation about Dr. Francia, by far the worst. If Francia, in that death hour, could not forgive his poor old father, whatsoever he had, or could in the murkiest, sultriest imagination be conceived to have done against him, then let no man forgive Dr. Francia. But the accuracy of public rumor, in regard to a dictator who has executed 40 persons, is also a thing that can be guessed at. To whom was it, by name and surname, that Francia delivered this extraordinary response? Did the man make, or can he now be got to make, affidavit of it, to credible articulate speaking persons resident on this earth? If so, let him do it, for the sake of the psychological sciences. One last fact more. Our lonesome dictator, living among Guachos, had the greatest pleasure, it would seem, in rational conversation, with Robertson, with Renger, with any kind of intelligent human creature, when such could be fallen in with, which was rarely. He would question you with eagerness about the ways of men in foreign places, the properties of things unknown to him. All human interest and insight was interesting to him. Only persons of no understanding being near him for most part, he had to content himself with silence, a meditative cigar and cup of mate. O Francia, though thou hadst to execute 40 persons, I am not without some pity for thee. In this manner, all being yet dark and void for European eyes, have we to imagine that the man Rodriguez Francia passed, in a remote, but highly remarkable, not unquestionable or unquestioned manner, across the confused theater of this world. For some 30 years, he was all the government his native Paraguay could be said to have. For some 26 years he was express sovereign of it, for some 3, or some 2 years, a sovereign with bared sword, stern as Rhadamanthus, through all his years, and through all his days, since the beginning of him, a man or sovereign of iron energy and industry, of great and severe labor. So lived dictator Francia, and had no rest, and only in eternity any prospect of rest. A life of terrible labor, but for the last 20 years, the Fulgencio plot being once torn in pieces and all now quiet under him, it was a more equable labor, severe but equable, as that of a hardy draft steed fitted in his harness, no longer plunging and champing, but pulling steadily till he do all his rough miles, and get to his still home. So dark were the Messrs. Robertson concerning Francia, they had not been able to learn in the least whether, when their book came out, he was living or dead. He was living then, he is dead now. He is dead, this remarkable Francia, there is no doubt about it. Have not we and our readers heard pieces of his funeral sermon? He died on the 20th of September, 1840, as the Reverend Perez informs us, the people crowding round his government house with much emotion, nay, with tears, as Perez will have it. 3 excellencies succeeded him as some directorate. Junta Gubernativa, or whatever the name of it is, before whom this Reverend Perez preaches. God preserve them many years.